the biggest horse girl of ancient Rome. Would you do anything for your favorite pet? Feeding them, petting them, loving them. They deserve it for the companionship they give. What about feeding them after giving their food a dusting of gold flakes? Or giving them a collar covered in rubies? Why not add in a special marble pet bed while we are spoiling them? This seems excessive, but it reminds me of a legend. A legend going back thousands of years to the days of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire with gladiators and centurions and togas written on the ancient scrolls that says that there was a pet who lived just like this. This legendary horse had a legendary name, Incatitus. And Incatitus spent his days being looked after by 18 servants while living in a marble stable like any proper legend. He must have been a magnificent horse with a glistening coat. But beyond being a good horsey, the reason for his opulent treatment was that his owner just so happened to be the emperor of Rome, Roman Empire Rome. But the Roman Empire had to have an emperor, and the emperor had his favorite pet horse. And Incatitus was the most imperial of horses to the emperor, Caligula. I've heard of horse girls, so why not a horse emperor? Emperor Caligula was actually just a nickname. This pet spoiler's full name was Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and he was born in the year 12. Caligula was a member of the family who first began ruling the empire, the Julii Caesares. You might recognize the name Julius Caesar. Caligula was a descendant of that family. And if you take a moment to think about super rich families today who seem to have been super rich for forever and how they seem to live completely differently than everyone else, you can get an idea about how the Julii Caesares family lived. But also add on to that, the emperor was also in charge of the entire government and army, and was worshipped as a god by some. So let's add up all that. The rich family who'd always been rich, as well as being the leader of the government and army, and worshipped as a god. I'm just painting a picture of how the lives of emperors were. And if the emperor was so pampered and worshipped, his favorite pet horse, Incitatus, had to be well looked after too. Later, historians even wrote in their ancient scrolls that Caligula wanted to make Incitatus consul, kind of like a president or mayor. That's what the consul was. And Caligula even wanted Incitatus to be a priest. When you are worshipped as a god, like Caligula was, I guess you get to appoint your own priests. And why not your favorite horse? I could not find what ultimately happened to Incitatus. I hope he was well cared for the rest of his days. But I could find what happened to Caligula. It wasn't pretty. He ended up being assassinated by his guards in the year 41. But now we get to discuss whether these fantastical stories about how the pet horse of the emperor lived were true. Like with many things in history, it is reliant on who is telling the tale and what their motivation might be. The majority of the information that we know about Incitatus is from historians who wrote over 100 years after Caligula was born. So we are likely talking about historians who are recording stories that were passed down in families. And while they likely had some truth in them, just like your grandma's story about how she once met the president, there is also some half-truths, like your grandma's story about why she was meeting the president. Another thing to consider is the motivations of the historians. While the Roman Empire was still around when they were written, the Julii Caesares were no longer the ones in charge. It was instead a new dynasty. And just like what happens in politics today, you blame everything bad on the previous guy and try to make them seem like monsters. So it's possible that the Emperor Caligula made a joke or metaphor involving his favorite pet horse, and that was twisted in an ancient game of telephone to become that he actually wanted his horse to be consul or priest, but it was nothing more than a joke. So the first explanation is that the extraordinary story about Incitatus was just that, a story. And while I do think it is possible that the idea of Caligula making his pet the president or priest seems exaggerated, I do think the stories of specific horse servants or marble horse beds do seem plausible. Keep in mind that Caligula was super rich, and his parents had been super rich, and his parents' parents had been super rich. He had never known a time. He had never known a time of being told he couldn't have anything he wanted. And he likely had had hundreds of servants just for him. So from looking at it from that point of view, what is having an extra 18 servants for his pet? There are people today who have staff or employees to care for their animals. Is it far-fetched that a powerful emperor would have the same, or to feed them extravagant food and buy them opulent things? Nothing seems more likely to me. The final explanation is that all of the tales about Incitatus were true. Not only did he live in a marble stable, wearing a jewel-encrusted collar, sleeping on an ivory bed, and eating the best gold-dusted food, but this life in horsey heaven also was full of swag. And this explanation, Caligula really was making plans to make his horse best friend consul and get him some swanky priest robes. Sometimes pet lovers like to dress up their fur ball. After all, what would be a better costume than a Roman priest hat? Just look at it. And on a handsome horse, majestic. But what do you think? If you could, would you spoil your pet like Caligula? Or do you think these stories are overboard? Let me know in the comments. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Ta-ta, my lovelies.